If you could give a brief intro as to what AdTech and Martech actually mean to you and your company, that would be very useful. Start with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. So my name is Jess, and I lead the marketing cloud practice for Salesforce across Asia. I had a really funny conversation with someone out the front that said, "Oh, Salesforce, that leads my life." And traditionally, everyone thinks of Salesforce as the traditional CRM that we started, but we've really, in the last 10 years, kind of invested in either innovation or acquisitions in the kind of Martech, AdTech space. So this is why this panel is really exciting for me. I think when we talk about AdTech and Martech, I'd like to see a day that we don't talk about AdTech and Martech and we talk about the customer and the data that drives the customer experience. And I think that that was very much the introduction we saw today, and very much what drove the panel prior to us is, how do I understand the data on my customer so I can execute the right action? And sometimes the right action is no action, and sometimes the best action is through an ad or through, a different channel. And so that's very much the vision of where we're investing and innovating. I think the other thing that's really interesting in the marketplace is around ecosystems, and we'll talk a lot about that, I think, today. Salesforce announced a huge partnership with Google. We had a lady stand up at our conference from Ticketmaster who said, finally, our biggest partners are now playing together. And I think we'll see that happen more and more. And it's been amazing for Salesforce to start that kind of relationship with Google. So certainly when I think of AdTech and Martech, I want to think about more around how do we just execute customer experience end to end. So we'll talk more about that.
Thank you, Jess. Yiorgos, over to you.
Hi, I'm Yiorgos. I work across Google's DoubleClick and GA360 products. I love this question because it always divides opinion, first and foremost. Some people are firmly in the camp of them being fundamentally different, and that AdTech is a facet of Martech, just like advertising is to marketing. Others believe that convergence has happened already, and this is why the lines are therefore blurred. If you think about some of the traditional dimensions, advertising technology is associated with paid-for media, generally one-to-many marketing of an unknown user, is often managed by agencies and works on commission-type pricing models. Martech, on the other hand, is generally associated with earned channels, one-to-one marketing, generally using first-party data that might be linked to things like CRM. Can often be managed in-house direct-to-vendor relationship, and I think generally works on subscription-based models. But the advancements in technology and data are sort of blurring the lines between these definitions. But I think at the core is data, leveraging technology to try and sort of deliver the holy grail of this customer-centric marketing.
Absolutely. Michael, over to you.
Hi there. Sorry, my voice. Michael Rehfeld, principal at Accenture Strategy Practice here in Singapore. I focus mostly on helping consumer goods clients across the region with their growth agenda, not just identifying growth, but also unlocking growth with the use of technology. So what does that mean in terms of AdTech and Martech? Effectively is using consumer-centric information and having the consumer at the core of the discussion, and trying to see how do you not just have an engagement with the consumer, but also convert that engagement into actual revenue uplift. Building on my previous panelists, I think consumer data is at the core of this. I think the convergence happened particularly in China already, where you actually have the one-to-one relationship, not just from a Martech perspective, but also from an AdTech perspective, and happy to talk about that more.
Excellent. And Michelle, finally over to you.
Michel de Rijk. What do I do? Well, I've been on this at this event, at this panel, in a few different roles. At the moment, throughout all these years, or the last 7-8 years, I've been working for Group M. What I do right now, I am globally responsible for the growth of our proprietary media businesses within Group M. Most famous one of that is Zaxxas. We have Plista, you have Finecast, which is our new addressable TV business, Triad, which is our retail business out of the US, Emergent, and a few other brands that we have launched or are launching globally. And I run globally the growth of that. I think after Yiorgos' sort of lecture around Martech and AdTech, I think in my eyes he covered most of it. I think For me, the biggest difference is I see Martech really linked into sort of the individual, the consumer, and I see AdTech more on the advertising execution side of it. And somewhere in the middle, they overlap, or they touch, or they converge. And again, that's probably something we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, thank you guys. I think that's a very interesting point. And I guess what comes into where they start to converge is this whole view of looking at customer centricity and remembering, and you can argue that often it's forgotten in AdTech that actually the customer is the center of this. And in Martech, the customer has always been the center of it. And in AdTech, it's starting to become that way, and that's how the convergence is happening. So what do we mean by customer-centric marketing, and how do we help marketers actually achieve that? Jess, from a sales perspective, like what's the deal with you?
I think I would imagine the marketers in the room would agree with this, that the role of the marketer, and we can talk about this on many panels, I'm sure, forever, is changing to be the custodian of the customer, as is probably every role in the business, if they're focusing on the right thing. And I think when we think about customer-centric marketing, it transcends what a traditional marketing view should look like. I'm encouraged when I go into customers' offices and we're having a conversation with all the key stakeholders in the room. And when I say stakeholders, I mean, the customer service team, we're talking about the product team, we're talking about the IT team, we're talking about the marketing team. And when we start to have that flurry of views in the room, we start to really see a strategy that falls into play where the customer is truly at the center. Where I get discouraged is when you meet with these different silos and they don't know what each other is doing.
But can I sort of step in there for a sec? But I agree to what you say, but I think when you talk about customer-centric marketing, what I see that a lot of brands or advertisers in general, they try to do customer-centric marketing, but if they forget that the back office of the organization needs to be customer-centric as well. Mm-hmm. And to your point, I see too often that there are different divisions there, or they're not aligned. There are different reward structures internally. They're
metrics
that
they're measured by.
I think you see that I'm not sure if they're in the room, but like telcos and banks. I mean, for me as a customer, the service experience that I have with banks and telcos is horrendous, right? And it's not because I don't think that person who services me isn't customer-centric, or the marketing I receive isn't customer-centric, but the organization is not built for it. And I think that's one of the challenges I see, that before you go into customer-centric marketing, a lot of cases we need to make sure that the company itself is customer centric, and I think that's a big challenge.
So it ties into, obviously, when we talk about marketing, I mean, it's just what Jess said about, you've got your IT teams, you've got your marketing teams, you've got kind of everything else in between. Actually, are they siloed, or are they communicating with each other? And yes, I might have a great experience with a mobile app, but actually when I speak to the call center, it's a completely horrendous experience. Those things aren't aligned. So where do we, I mean, Jess, from your perspective, that's exactly kind of what Salesforce is trying to obviously help marketers achieve. How do they get started from that perspective to even then think about it from a marketing perspective?
So I think we talked about the people and the actual centricity of the business, and I think the businesses that Salesforce gets the best results from are those businesses that can hustle around the customer and create technology layers that support that. So when I'm calling the customer service line, they have a view or a lens into what the marketers have done upstream to get me to this point. So I think from a Salesforce perspective, we're looking at how we can attach the unknown through to that known journey, so that moment we're actually serving them with what the customer's experiencing from their perspective versus what we think in our brand silos and our brand buckets. A great experience moving to Singapore is, I buy my telco package and then a day later I get an advert for a package the same that's $10 less. I call the customer call center and they have no idea, firstly, of the advert and have no capability in their lens to be able to change my package. I basically have to pay out that contract to be able to take advantage of the lower one. And again, this isn't the fault of the customer service person because they're doing their job. It's not the fault of the marketer because they're doing their job. And so I think it's just fundamentally, and I'm so excited to be in this industry because we're seeing this shift. I'm starting to walk into boardrooms where they're not talking about, okay, customer service, you get up and talk about yours, sales, you talk about yours. It's like, where is the team that is the custodian of the customer? And let's talk about what we're doing around that. So I do think that we're going to have to, and I mean, this talks to first party data, which I think a lot of the panelists before and also the kickoff, we talked about that. There's this emergence now of the value of first party data. And to see, a business like Salesforce, all of our key investments have started to be in ad tech, in all of these various marketing capabilities. so that we can give a voice to all that customer data that we're storing. But I'm talking too much, so you guys go.
Michael, I'm interested in Accenture's view of this, because obviously you have a different view of the marketers that you work with than Jess from the Salesforce side would have. So how do you work with your clients to achieve this kind of holy grail of customer centricity, and how do you kind of converge those two worlds together?
So I think there are a couple of points around having a multifunctional view on the consumer, right? And digital as a whole is helping a lot of multinational companies to actually come together and see what the art of the possible is from a technology perspective, and how the consumer can be carried all the way through. So not just from a brand, from a marketing perspective around generating brand engagement, but also then what does that mean from a customer service? What does it mean from a supply chain perspective? Because the fulfillment and the touch points is very different. When we talk about customer centricity, I think coming back to where I believe leading practice is currently happening is in China, where you have an ecosystem of advertising platform that's linked with social media platforms, so Tencent, WeChat, having the right partnership with JD.com, where you actually have conversion of not just the advertising and the social engagement, but actually a purchase, path to purchase. And that becomes a one-to-one relationship across the entire value chain. And we've been working with a dairy company across China and helping them, I don't know, incremental 5% revenue uplift. And I think that movement is going to move outside China, right? So we see partnerships happening in Southeast Asia with Alibaba pushing with JD, now also working with Google here in the region, trying to look at retail solutions. So I think this holy grail is going to become more real for that. Primary data becomes much more important, and I see a lot of multinationals looking at driving primary data themselves, owning that data, so having a similar mindset to what Grab described earlier.
And Yiorgos, I'm interested in your perspective on this as well, particularly from, I mean, it was great to hear the marketer panel earlier. Obviously, they picked up Google and their usage of Google quite a lot, so you must have been delighted.
Well, they are a sponsor, right?
I knew that was coming at some point. But I'm interested in your perspective. Obviously, we talk about kind of partnerships a lot, and we're talking about your partnership with Salesforce. Can advertisers achieve what they want to achieve with one tech stack? Do they need to work with multiple vendors? And if they do, how is it their responsibility to make sure that those vendors are working together, or is it responsibility of the vendors to make sure that they are actually combining and connecting?
Okay, cool. So that's quite a loaded question. I'll try and break it down.
Yeah.
I think some of the challenges in speaking to marketers is that organizations are quite siloed from a business perspective, but also in technology. It's very unusual for one marketer to be using one technology. And I think that in order to start in true customer-centric marketing, you really need to break down silos within the organization. That comes down to understanding and analyzing the type of technology partnerships that you have today across infrastructure, all the way through to Martech and AdTech. And then setting like a future vision of what like great actually looks like. And then figuring out whether or not you can do that with one or multiple technology partners. If you sort of reference certain studies, most advertisers are trying to go down the route of consolidated technology approach, but very few actually believe that one or two suppliers out there can actually deliver the holy grail. We believe the same at Google. We think in order to create a healthy ecosystem, we need to be connecting ecosystems from both within inside our own organization and the rest of other vendors and partners that are out there in the marketplace. Salesforce is a great example of a partnership which allows us to actually share insights from a Google ecosystem through Google Analytics 360 into the Salesforce cloud. So I don't think that one particular supplier can solve for all. I think actually what it comes down to is trying to help marketers understand this really complex ecosystem. And I think we've all got a role in this panel to play there in helping. In the Martech section alone, there are over 5,000 vendors across 30 different segments. How does a CMO, CTO, CIO even begin to navigate their technology decisions in this particular use case?
I think the bigger challenge, sorry, just to butt in quickly there, is let's like move tech stack out of the way, and I think you guys will probably deal with this all the time, is I often walk into like organizations that don't even know what their objectives are at the first place. So I think Wendy mentioned earlier this concept of people, process, product, and I think if we can get those three streams working well, overpinning that with an objective that everyone's moving towards, I find that that's the biggest struggle, is leave technology to, that's a good decision to make, but we need to really understand what we're trying to achieve, and that is ultimately a big
I think that's a
struggle.
crucial point, because I see a lot of advertisers today who lead with trying to make a decision on which tech partner to go with, instead of what are we actually trying to solve here. And that is a big challenge, to be honest.
And having been in so many of these implementations across Asia, I think the ones that always fail are typically not because of the technology, it's because we didn't know where we were running to. And so we've run like this, and we've added tech vendors along the way, and that's why people like the lovely Accentures and Group M's and agencies and consulting practices are here, I guess. But yeah, I think it's the objective is really key.
And so Accenture, Group M, what are your roles when it comes to helping advertisers understand what technology they need, why they need it, scoping out kind of what the best option for them is, and then actually helping them implement it? Michelle, what's your kind of, how do you work with them on that, especially from a growth perspective?
I think it's a few different angles there. I think the challenge is, to the point earlier, is that, it's not very difficult for an interesting Martech or EdTech company to go to an advertiser and present a very appealing story, right? It's not difficult. And it's very difficult for the advertiser to actually find out and actually do proper due diligence on what are the true capabilities of that technology. Is it able to deliver sort of the needs that I have? Is it able to deliver or solve the problems or the challenges that we have? And does it work especially with the rest of what I do? Not only from a technology point of view, but also, overall strategy and where my company stands for. And I think both an agency group as well as an Accenture play have a massive role to play there, because we know, I'm not going to speak for you here, by the way, but I think we know obviously I don't get paid per hour, so that's easy. We know that we know the advertiser quite well. Because we have in-depth relationship with them. We know where they come from, where they're going to, and we know what their business challenges are. So I think we play a massive role to be this neutral advice to the advertisers to make sure that they make the right decisions. And do we believe that advertisers should own their own tech relationships? Do we believe that they should have direct access? And do we believe that they should host and own their own data? Yeah, absolutely, right? And I think it's important that we support them in that decision as well, and be that trusted advisor that we've always been.
That's a really interesting and important point, and it ties in very well with where the convergence of AdTech and Martech is coming, and kind of where AdTech is moving from beyond the business of media, beyond looking at what the CPM is, the CPV and everything else, but actually to what the actual business outcome is, and tying it back to business metrics. Are you finding, to anybody in the panel, are you finding those conversations are enhancing when you're speaking to advertisers, that they are trying to tie them back to business metrics and not just look at advertising in a silo?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest change in the last 2 years, I guess, is measured or performance measured marketing, being much more data driven in terms of how you make decisions, not just from a strategic perspective in terms of where you invest, but also then how you're going to allocate your resources across all the different channels. And that's not just digital marketing, that's also your traditional channels. And I think this transformation has happened at the top of the house with most of the advertisers in terms of at a global level, having a really good understanding in terms of what's actually feasible, even at a regional level. But I think the challenges we see is how do you engage and how do you make this happen on a day-to-day basis at a market level? Simply because the talent may not be at that level, right? So everyone is digital savvy, but not data driven, and this education that needs to happen with the brand marketeers in market, as well as then what is the right solution for a specific market. What works in Indonesia does not necessarily work for the Philippines. Yeah.
And Yiorgos, what's your perspective on that?
I think we need to move from kind of short-term sales to lifetime value of a customer. And I think that when you find the right solution by doing a huge amount of analysis within your own organization, there's actually an opportunity to do this as more and more companies across AdTech and Martech converge, right? So that's where we want to get users to. I don't just think that from a service perspective, evolution needs to happen. It's also happening from within our own organizations. We've come on a interesting journey ourselves from the vendor side, and Jess and I were talking last week. If you think about the starting points, Salesforce in Martech, Google in media and AdTech, we've come through an interesting journey ourselves through acquisition over the course of the past 15 years. How do we evolve our own skill sets within our own organization to get closer to delivering this holy grail? And it's challenging. I'm an example of that. 15 years in the media industry, and today we're talking about Martech and cloud infrastructure. All of these things need to come together if we're to deliver this advertiser promise.
And do they come together? Are all these partners, and I'm talking, from the traditional Martech to the traditional AdTech to the agencies to the consultancies, is there that cohesiveness that the advertiser is obviously needing and wanting to help them succeed, in your opinion?
I feel like over the course of the last 18 months, there's a real joint effort and collaboration around how we try and figure this out together. It's by no means perfect, and there's no one technology solution that probably fits all. We're evolving our business to be able to service agencies and build capability from a media conversation into cloud and Martech. We're introducing partnerships teams within our organizations to work with consultancies, which are newer relationships within our own business organization today, and also helping engage in global systems integrators that can actually bridge that CMO and CTO conversation. So we're all going on this journey together.
Michelle, looked like you wanted to...
Sorry. I'm just wondering, when we talk about convergence of Martech and AdTech, I think a lot of people look at it from a, Martech companies who got deep pockets, acquiring AdTech, try to integrate it and create sort of their full stack. Or are we talking about convergence where, existing Martech companies and existing AdTech companies put more time and effort in and work more closely together to tie it up as an ecosystem and have room for these consultants and system integrators in between? And I think
hopefully the latter.
Well, that's what I
think it's both.
Yeah. I mean, it is. The industry is in massive flux, and you do have these acquisitions and these kind of new arms being opened and everything else. But surely that then feeds into the wider thing of actually helping the advertisers bring everything together.
Absolutely.
And it's happening for that reason. Yeah.
It should.
And you're seeing that.
Well, I see that absolutely, and I think and let it be a Salesforce and Google, but I think there are more examples where, and personally, I think that's also easier to bridge than try as a Martech company to acquire an AdTech company where you go into different business models, different type of talent, different type of relationships. And I'm not saying it can't succeed, but those are big bets. And I think there's room, and I think there's development at least in tying these different ecosystems together. And there's a whole new sort of economy that comes out of it, which is more these system integrators that are popping up everywhere right now.
The middleware.
Yeah, there's a middleware, and there's a role to play for us as a trusted advisor of an agency and for an Accenture and a couple of other companies probably. But that's what I see on the convergence side, if you talk about it, and less so the acquisition activities.
Yeah.
Per se.
Interesting. And I'm interested on your perspective on how agencies and also consultancies, Michael, from your point of view, how they are keeping up with the technology developments that are happening and need to happen. I mean, how is Group M kind of keeping up with everything happening?
I mean, from a Group M perspective, I think we have a bit of a double role in this. We own technology ourselves in certain areas, which we believe that the moment that a piece of technology is commoditized or should be commoditized, and it's not a piece of technology that we believe we should own, right? So that is when it comes to ad serving or when it comes to more the Martech type of products. But the reality is that also Martech and AdTech companies understand the value of agencies because of our trusted relationship with the advertisers. So the moment that there are new developments within that space, we have direct relationships with the different Martech companies, with the different tech companies in general. So we get updated a lot. We do a lot of joint pitches. We do a lot of sort of joint work in that area. So we believe that we are at the top of the latest developments. Yeah. And to be honest, I think that the interesting thing there is that, you know, if we would talk, for example, to a Salesforce, or we talk to an Oracle, or we talk to a Google, or we talk to all these companies, or an Adobe, we get a lot of information from them, because, you know, if they don't update us or inform us, eventually we're an easy entry point to a lot of different advertisers, right? So there's something to gain on both sides. So we believe that we could talk to all these different companies and get a clear understanding about what capabilities and skills are, to also take that information and use that as our as sort of data for our advice to our clients.
We're running out of time, unfortunately, and I knew this would happen. But I really wanted, before we end, I really want to get everyone's perspectives on kind of what the future state looks like. When we talk about what this convergence of AdTech and Martech will become, you know, we're probably wrongly making the assumption that all the big companies like the Ciscos of the world that clearly do have things, you know, very well covered, have got this nailed, and that's not the case. But also you've got companies like Carousel and like Grab that are doing really, really interesting things, and they are these kind of like the D2C startup brands. That are they doing better? Are these the ones to focus on? How do we help brands both big and small actually achieve this convergence for each one of you? So Jess, very quickly, we have 1.5 minutes left.
Okay, I'm really good at being quick. So I think it just goes back to my first point. It's like, I would like to see a day that we don't sit up here talking about AdTech or Martech, but just talk about the experience of a customer or the engagement of a customer across any channel, and how we can empower that through the data we know and the technology that we have on top of that.
So I think we need to get to a point where we're using customer data across both on and offline in order to deliver the Holy Grail. I think there are some great integrated technology solutions out there, but they can't deliver the promise alone. And so more partnerships and strategic engagement with service partners are really, really important. Madtech, as it's known, is obviously here to stay. I think convergence is going to become more prevalent, and products are going to come to market sooner. Engineering teams now are working harder to get things and solutions faster to the market. And I think customer centricity, you know, will prevail as we start to bring these technology solutions together.
Yeah. So building on this, data, or consumer data or customer data, is going to be a center for this. I think brands, multinationals, will try and drive more one-to-one relationships and direct engagements with their consumers, and therefore have a much richer data set that can be used across AdTech and Martech. I think from a technology perspective, companies in the end don't really, or a multinational doesn't really care what tech they use, right? They want the right stack, and it's up for the partners they work with to provide that stack. I think what's more important is around what capabilities are crucial for an advertiser to have, and what's the right capability ecosystem in terms of in-house versus out or third party to work with, where I think there's a lot of change happening in the way companies operate these days, and that's probably where we're going to see a lot of change going forward.
Thank you. And Michelle, over to you.
I think the bigger brands will find out that a one-stack solution is not going to fulfill all their needs. For some of them, might take a little bit longer than for others. I think the smaller, more agile brands are already have recognized that and already taken their own path. Because of that, I see a massive rise of what I mentioned earlier, the system integrator type of businesses that tie all the different technology pieces together, make sure that you can pick and choose best of class. So probably next year around this time we'll have more of those companies around, and we see that sort of being the convergence more than anything else.
Brilliant, thank you. I want to say thank you to all my panelists, Jess, Yiorgos, Michael and Michelle. We could have talked about that all day long probably, but thank you for your time.
Thank you.